I think that the thing that's like really important for like communities and POC who are looking to like have these conversations is to like, for me, I always like to start it from a place of understanding and openness, and like for me that means that we kind of have to talk about like why we stigmatize things like as communities and in families and things. And like I think the situation, like this is like, I think that what happens for a lot of like POC is that when we're like underserved with things such like with like, if we're underserved in healthcare, if we're underserved in education, and if we're underserved with like, you know, like mental health support, sometimes stigma is something that we use to like, sometimes stigma is something that we use as a way to keep ourselves safe. So it's like, if you have like a parent who's like an immigrant or like a new Canadian who like maybe doesn't have a super great handle on like the language, like on English, or like maybe if you're someone who you know, is living like who's like low income and like just maybe doesn't have like access and like has to work all the time, like doesn't have access to like be around and have these in-depth conversations. Sometimes the way that we can pass on messages to our kids and stuff is by using stigma and shame. So like if you take like, it's kind of heavy, but like if you take the AIDS crisis, for example, there was this understanding that like the virus, like HIV virus, like mostly like had a disproportionate effect on the communities that they call like 4-H. So like heroin users, hemophiles, so like people who have to get a lot of blood transfusions, Haitians, and homosexuals. So like if you look at sort of the POC like intersection of that, and you look at like people who are like, you know, coming over and just like, you know, not having the resources they need, if you don't have time to say like, hey, there's this mysterious virus that seems to be disproportionately affecting like our community, we don't have any information about it, it's nobody's real priority to like take care of us through it, and we only kind of know that it's like vaguely passed through sex, like if you don't have the information you need about like, this is how to use a condom, this is how to have a conversation, sometimes the tool you'll use is being like, sex bad, we don't do sex, like we're not gonna have sex, you know?
Yeah, you reduce it to like the simplest thing.
Yeah,
and that can be harmful.
Yeah, and it's like, and you see that like in other places too, because it's like another thing that we do have to protect ourselves from is like having kids when we're not ready. And so, you know, sometimes instead of being like, hey, like, you know, you need to make an informed decision about whether you want to have protected or unprotected sex and think about like, you know, what this is going to lead to in the future. Sometimes we're just like, sex evil, sex bad, premarital sex like bad, because it's like, then you don't have to have all of these nuanced conversations. And so if we can kind of like come from a place of understanding like why we stigmatize, it's easier to stop doing it, because like, yeah, like it is oftentimes like, especially when done within POC communities, it does often have like, the goal is to protect ourselves and the goal is to protect each other. The reason that we can't keep doing it is because it doesn't work. Stigmatizing is based on shaming and based on making like making people who are in stigmatized communities, like it's sort of like, what it does is like, it builds a wall around them, and it says just like, don't become like those people, because you're going to lose your community, you're going to lose your health, like you're going to lose like all of these things that are important to you, and then you're going to be part of them, and they're dirty and they're bad. And like, that doesn't actually work, because if we make mistakes, like there's not that moment of just being like, oh, you can make a mistake and come back from it and be okay. It's like literally very much just like, if you mess this up, then you're one of them. And a lot of people, you know, shame like actively just like doesn't work it's just not, it's not an effective tool for like growth and change. So if people already feel bad about like, they feel bad about sex, they feel that they want to have sex, they don't have any information about how to have sex safely, and they know that if they ask or if they like look for more information, they're probably going to be like ostracized by their community. Like your option usually is to like go into secret and do things like secretly, or just to like sometimes like pretend that you don't want the thing until you're in a situation, and then you make risky decisions. So like for me, like when I think about like stigma and like why it's so important to like have these conversations with not necessarily like everyone in your life, but it's important to have these conversations, because otherwise like you kind of end up putting yourself at risk, and then you just don't even have a support system because you don't like, you know, like you were like your whole contingency plan was to just not do the thing. To combat stigma, you have to make you have to have interactions with people that really that are just like, you're open about the fact that the goal is not to shame. Like the goal is not to make you feel bad. The goal is not to make people who have, you know, chronic health stuff or like STIs or like to not make those people feel bad, but to just sort of like understand like what's happening and like what's going on. It's a really important goal to like destigmatize, because, you know, stigmatization and shame doesn't work. And when you're looking at how to create an environment that like you're able to do that work of destigmatization in, yeah, like what I did is I kind of had to learn that manually. Like I had to learn like okay, if this doesn't work, what does? And like yeah, so over the year, and what's really interesting is like my background in like performance and like stand-up comedy and childcare and stuff, that gave me a lot of opportunities to like try different things, to see like, what is it like if I go through destigmatization by making fun of myself? What is it like if I combat destigmatization by learning a whole bunch of things? Like what happens if I combat destigmatization by like focusing on pleasure and things that feel good? What is it like tackling destigmatization with like a young person who's like learning about the world, like, you know? So it's like I've had a lot of experience like just, you know, trying to actively create spaces where you know, we could foster love and care instead of shame. And yeah, the things that I kind of keep coming back to are like, when you are trying to create an environment that's safe to talk about difficult things, you want to, and this is how I've kind of structured my counseling practice. So what we offer is privacy, kindness, non-judgment, and consistency. And so when you look at that and you look at like sexual health and talking to like, and POC talking about sexual health, you kind of want to look at your community, and you want to look at people in your life that you feel you know, that you maybe feel comfortable creating those spaces with. So it might not look like a parent necessarily, or like a grandparent, but it could look like a brother, like a cousin, like an aunt or an uncle, just like maybe someone who has like a little bit of space from things. And yeah, I think that's like a good way to start.